Hello and welcome to a Mike Dispatch for the Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast. Sad to be missing another edition of the show, guys. It has felt like I've been going through withdrawal. I need to get back for another pod, but so many things to talk about. I'll get into some of it, but save the rest of my thoughts for the next episode that I'm able to join next week. Of course, top story and really just a sad day, and Sammy did a great job of covering it, and I know you're talking about it in this episode as well. Losing Peter Mayhew, certainly setting this forth the standard of a generation of acting for Chewbacca and really instilling himself into all of us, into our memories and our experience growing up. I mean, I can't say enough about him. And I was just in Disney World and got a chance to go and meet Chewbacca in the character meet and greets they have at Hollywood Studios. And it felt a little bit more emotional than I was expecting because of everything that had just come out about Peter Mayhew and the fact that he had passed on. So certainly thinking about him and all of his family and friends and those who grew up loving him as a character and all that he gave us in his performances. Other news to talk about, of course, the announcement that there will be 3 Star Wars films. I know you're talking about all of this, but I'll just give you my thoughts real quick. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think any Star Wars that's cut out of the schedule and waiting 3 years before the next movie is too long. I don't want to wait till 2022 to see what Rian Johnson is doing or to see what Benioff and Weiss are doing, and maybe not Benioff and Weiss the way the final season of Game of Thrones is going. However, it is good to know that they aren't waiting too long. We're not going on a 5-10 year break. It still seems like a little while, but at least we'll start to get into a more normal schedule. Seems like hopefully they'll be consistent at that point. And I'm sure you both have had much more to say on this. What is it, a Bouncy Boys podcast? It's not a Wild Boys. There's no Chris, but I'm sure you both have gotten into all of the details on this, and I can't wait to listen to your conversation. Other thing I have to say is that I just got back from Disney World, as I said. Quite the experience. I did not find my way into Galaxy's Edge. I was doing some recon, trying to get a little bit more information for all our droid listeners out there, but I didn't get any more information, unfortunately. I stood outside of Galaxy's Edge. I could see the tip of Black Spire Outpost just above the wall, got a picture in front of the opening there, and then I stood around, waited for the stormtroopers, got to talk to a couple of death troopers, had a moment with R2-D2, all just dreams come true. And this wasn't even Galaxy's Edge. This was just Hollywood Studios. I'll have more to talk about my VR experience there as well. The meet and greet I had with Kylo Ren, all of this to talk about in the next edition of the podcast. But I do want to weigh in with my top choices for MCU moments of Endgame. And I think you all really hit on a lot of them in the last pod. But I was a bit surprised. I have two of my 3 you did not touch on. And the first one is Tony talking with his daughter. And it was the early scene where he's putting her to bed after he's figured out time travel, because, you just do that very quickly before you put your children to bed. I know, as a dad, I really have figured out time travel multiple times before putting my son to bed. So I get where Tony's coming from. But in the moment where his daughter says, "I love you 3,000," that just got to me. And the fact that came back later in the movie, and now I do think this will be something that fans turn into t-shirts, into bumper stickers. It rung so true and felt very genuine in the way they wrote those scenes between Tony and his daughter. And I think everything else that we saw, you talked about the scene with Happy and the cheeseburgers at the end, they really played that emotionally well and connected into a family story for Tony Stark that we hadn't seen before in any of the other films. Then my second one, and it's one that I'm shocked did not come up already, Captain America, Peggy, Steve Rogers and Peggy at the end of the movie, the final scene. I won't go too far into what you both know I'll probably talk about too much going forward about the fact that I predicted that the scene would be in the movie, but to end the movie on that, I've seen it twice now. Finally got a chance to see it a second time. There's nothing that makes me tear up more than Steve finally getting his dance with Peggy, and that the two of them are together in the end. It's what I've wanted for so long. The movie was building to it. They had flashbacks. They went back in time. I guess flashback's not correct, but they went back in time in the 1970s. There were moments when Steve pulled out the compass. They talked about Peggy very early on. It felt like they just kept building and building, and my smile just got wider and wider, and I was so happy to see Steve end up with Peggy back in time, even if there are paradoxes, whatever it means. I was thrilled and thought that was beautiful with them both dancing to the song that, if you noticed, on the record was the record that was playing when Nick Fury came to see Steve Rogers in The Winter Soldier after he had been attacked by the Winter Soldier, and he's sitting in that chair and he's playing a record, and Steve comes in surprised that there's something playing in his apartment that he wouldn't have left himself, and it was that same song. So does that mean that it's always happened? No, because I think the time travel they're trying to talk about is that it's not. It's some different form of time travel. You wouldn't go back and change it, but nonetheless, just an interesting note that song played in both occasions within the MCU. And then my last one that I will briefly say is, of course, well, really, it's two. It's just all Captain America stuff. And Ryan, I know you touched on a lot of them, but I will briefly say I loved the moment where Captain America was worthy. Steve gets the hammer, uses the hammer, and of course, the Hail Hydra moment. Love the conversation. Missed being on that pod last week, but can't wait to be back next week. Keep it going for these bouncy guys out here, and I'll get back next week to restore the order. The Jedi Order, should I say?
Welcome back to the Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast. Along with Ryan, I am Sam. We are sadly without Mike, who is away, and without Chris, who is also away. They're off exploring the outer far reaches. We've already used the Outer Rim thing, and I don't want them both to be exploring the Outer Rim, so...
Well, Chris, the last time I saw him, he was an old man sitting on a park bench. And the last time I saw Mike, he was holding a red glove with a bunch of jewels in it.
Oh, no.
And he said, "This'll be a snap."
Oh, no.
I said, "Geez Louise." I can't tell you, officially the spoiler ban has been lifted off of Endgame. Not that what I just said were spoilers, really, but I gotta tell you, I'm living with relief.
I find it interesting that, I feel like you and I have talked at length about spoiler culture, and I think...
Yeah.
I think you're a little, I
think it's a bit
I think
much.
you're a little farther post-spoiler than I am, which I think is a great place to be, where you are. But, there's still definitely things that, I want to preserve for the movie-going experience. There's things I don't want to know if I can avoid them. But I do think that, it's been very interesting as I've gotten less concerned with spoilers in general about all things, or about what I consider a spoiler. It's been interesting to step back and look at the culture as a whole, and how it's I do think we're in it's just ever evolving. This movie Endgame was such a big deal that there was all sorts of advance warning about don't spoil the Endgame. Let people Marvel and Disney and the Russos had this huge vested interest in not spoiling the movie that they were putting out in theaters for people to see, which is that's when it's out. But then it's they've also now, as directors, because they took on so much of the spoiler protection burden, they've also arbitrarily decided when to lift it, and it was not quite arbitrary, because it very clearly was a Sony marketing push
yes.
that determined when spoiler ban was lifted.
Yeah, they were striking while the iron was hot.
Right. And it's also interesting. Can you not say iron, my man? But the trailer itself for Spider-Man. Oh, not did I say Homecoming? I meant Far From Home. Whatever.
You
The
didn't
Spider-Man.
say either. That was the first time you've said anything.
I'm talking in my head, and I'm living in the future. Some say I have a time stone. But the trailer itself actually had a spoiler warning ahead of it, which I don't know that I've ever seen. And first of all, it would be what trailer? All trailers basically should say we have spoilers, because that's what a trailer is. But then what's even more interesting is it's talking about spoilers for an existing movie, another movie. It's very weird.
I've never seen someone before a trailer say, if this, then don't watch this trailer.
It's like catnip. It's like catnip for all the
spoiler
junkies.
It's been an interesting thing. Anyway, in a insensitive and clunky transition, we do have some sad news.
Yeah, man, I feel like we could have found a better way to get there, but you know what? That's in keeping with the droid tradition of just smooth sailing.
Yeah, I mean,
so obviously,
sure. Non sequitur.
We learned just last week, it was last Thursday. There was some.
Yeah, right after we recorded,
there was some news we shared that that Peter Mayhew passed away.
Episode.
On April 30th. He was 74. Peter, of course, originated the role of Chewbacca, the greatest co-pilot the galaxy's ever seen. And so we had just like a quick moment to acknowledge it last week, but obviously we had a complete episode already recorded all about Endgame, and so we did want to just spend a little more time. Ryan, talk to me about Chewbacca. Any favorite moments or just memories you want to like share about what that character, what that actor, his performance has meant for you?
Right. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the number one attribute that when you think about Chewbacca is kind of his physicality, right? And obviously his iconic roar that he has. But the amount, when you really think about what Peter Mayhew did with Chewbacca by making him so fully fledged, so fleshed out and warm, while also being a domineering presence, it just so much was done with that character. And I mean, this is the second of the original four, that we've lost in the last few years, and that's heartbreaking. And I think that his performance as Chewbacca obviously was iconic. I don't know much other acting work that he did. I'm sure that he did. It's just, this will obviously be the thing he is most remembered for, and rightfully so. It's one of the most recognizable characters on the planet. But beyond that, I mean, by all accounts, he was... obviously, we didn't know him personally, but by all accounts, he was the loveliest man. He was always very warm to fans. He was always very game to kind of show up to cons and to do Q&As, and also had like a very good sense of humor about the whole medal ceremony thing. I saw him in several interviews bring that up. And he very gracefully handed off the torch to Jonas, to play Chewbacca. It was kind of one of those things. We saw him on set during Force Awakens, but I think he was a little unwell by then. He also had trouble kind of moving around. He walked with a cane and things like that. And there was a very graceful and gracious way that was kind of handed off. That it seemed like in The Force Awakens that he was present sometimes. They kind of wanted to keep the legacy alive, but then Jonas, because he was more mobile and things like that, would kind of take over for Chewbacca. And I think Peter Mayhew handled that wonderfully, because he did interviews, but he didn't take away from Jonas at all. So, it's a big loss. It's sad. Like, he is one of the four,
I think it's interesting, like when you say he's one of the original four, I think we really often we think of like the original three. I think we think of Han, Luke, and Leia, and what is really, I guess, been something I was thinking about, especially in the last few days, was that really, Chewbacca was effectively a non-speaking character. He wasn't subtitled. Obviously, he spoke. He had I can't remember the language. There's a name for the language that Wookiees speak, but like he was effectively a non-speaking character, but he did so much to like help to define Han, and he and Han had their own relationship. He was a fully fledged character in his own right, but then in addition, he I think really helped to soften and humanize Han Solo. I mean, like Harrison Ford kind of gets the greatest role in cinema history in some ways, like thanks to Chewbacca being there and being at his side and like being there to like soften his rough edges and show his humanity and show his foibles. You also mentioned his physicality. I mean, the interesting thing is that I read that he was initially discovered. There's like a weird story. He was like initially discovered at something like a gathering of men with large feet, or it was like a study or like a conference or something.
I believe that's where Chris is right now.
Yes, Chris is at the
taking photos for posterity.
Oh yeah, he's not being paid. That's just for his personal collection, just on his phone for keepsies. Keepsies for the tootsies. But he was discovered, and he was like an orderly at he like worked nights at a hospital or something, at like maybe like a clinic or a mental hospital or something. So it's like this guy had no designs initially on being an actor, and to step in to know sort of like, yeah, we're hiring you because you're physically imposing, because you're big, you're tall, we can use you in a very specific way, and then to not just embrace that, but to also run with it and define things. Like, I always think of, when I think of Chewbacca and his mannerisms, like in addition to the Chewbacca's roar, in addition to like Chewbacca's, fur, his costume, I always think of like the way he would, like in his bickering with Han, there was a move that he would do, and I think when I describe it, I think you'll be able to picture it. He would throw his head backward and nod on like a slight tilt, yeah. And so it was like, it was kind of this thing that just so quickly communicated like what their relationship was and how Chewie felt about whatever Han had just said.
Yeah, there's never any question as to, obviously, Han and Chewie have a similar relationship that like C-3PO and R2-D2 do in terms of how the audience is getting the information, right? So C-3PO reacts to what R2-D2 said, and so we can infer what R2-D2 said. That's no easy feat. Also, like, it imbues R2-D2 with an incredible amount of personality. The same thing with Chewbacca, although Chewbacca had his own personality because of the physicality of it, because of what Peter Mayhew was doing. However, Han reacts to things, and that's great comic value, but there's never a moment where you don't have the idea of what Chewbacca said, based on what he's doing with his body, like what you said, like with his head, the way his body language is, and obviously the roar. But Han reacts, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't know what Chewie said in terms of vibe.
Yes,
and that's no easy feat.
Yeah, and I think that it's just on a furtherance of that comparison. And I definitely think that R2 and C-3PO like obviously work so well together, and we could dedicate a whole episode just to talking about their relationship and their comedy. But I will also say though that I think that Han's dialogue and Harrison Ford's reactions to Chewbacca help clarify or reinforce what the audience knows he's said, in the same way that 3PO does that for R2. But what goes one step further is I think that like Chewbacca's and Peter Mayhew's mannerisms and physicality like also further enlighten us to what Han's saying, whether it's bluster, whether yes. And that's a thing that maybe we don't get quite as much of with R2. And this is in no way a slam, but again, it's the costume's different, the character's defined differently. I also
no, but that's a really interesting point. I never thought about that. It gives an idea. It gives a contrast to Han's arrogance. It takes the piss out of him a little bit.
It does, and I think that that's a critical factor in liking him. I mean, we were probably going to like him because he's so cool, and he comes in, and ultimately he comes back to help save the day. But I do think that like we're charmed by him earlier. I mean, Rian Johnson said in one of the many interviews around The Last Jedi, he said when he hugged Chewbacca, one of the things that surprised him was that he was like, it's like hugging a dog. He's like, he feels like, the way like under the fur, it feels like similar to when you like go up and like pet or hug a dog, as opposed to like a big, ape man or something like that. Like, and I do think it's kind of like, it was really, really smart that George Lucas kind of gave Han a dog and then made it like the best dog in space. Not to minimize at all what he's doing, but it's like it is a way again to just like further, color a perception of a character and define a relationship. And Peter Mayhew did that like so well as someone who I think, at least starting out, was a non-actor. And then you just to also you talked about how he was by all accounts a wonderful man and someone who really embraced the fans and embraced like the fact that his sort of singular claim to fame was in this huge franchise, and he seemed happy with that. There was never a frustration or bitterness that you sometimes see with like other performers who have one big thing. He seemed to find joy in it, and it reminds me of like seeing interviews he did or the way he talked about the role reminds me a lot of of like Roger Moore as like the sort of most affable of the James Bonds. He was kind of like the best to the fans, like all through his later life and everything. And there's a similarity there that just it's endearing, and it's nice to think that like, oh, this stuff that we all love and we demand so much of actually brought the performer some joy. I hate to think of it as a burden, and it never appeared to be a burden on Peter Mayhew.
Yes. Beautifully put. It's a big loss, but what a legacy to leave. And of course, from all the droids, our condolences go out to his family and friends and the whole Star Wars family.
Yes, and if you did want to read there, just as of our recording, so this would be on Wednesday the 8th. Jonas Sotomo did actually write. He wrote a short piece that I see it here on Time Magazine. I think that's who published it directly. Just wrote a remembrance and talked about his meeting and working alongside and in the footsteps of Peter Mayhew. And it's a really, really short, really lovely read. We can link to it in our notes for the show. Or we'll tweet it out or something. But just if anybody wants to read some nice words from our current Chewie, remembering the man who came before. And that's about it for news, right, Ryan?
Well, yeah. So moving on to kind of the only news of the week, besides the fact that Werner Herzog has never seen a Star Wars movie.
I also love that. I like to imagine that he's so impressed by what they're doing on The Mandalorian just because he's like never been aware.
Yeah. So yeah, this is very large production, and it makes the birds cry in pain. Anyway, so thank you, Werner, for that little drop in. Anyway, so we learned they've announced that after Episode 9 that the Star Wars films would be going on hiatus until December of 2022. As people may have heard, Disney acquired Fox and probably most of the things you own, and they are now in a savvy business move, perhaps. Alternating years, they've delayed Avatar 2 a year so that every Avatar sequel, and there's going to be 4 sequels, that puts us to Avatar 5.
And it's crazy. I think most of our listeners know, living in New York. I mean, when they, there was some interest and excitement around the Star Wars news, but it's been nonstop riots in the street about the delaying of Avatar 2.
Well, I was shocked. The banks were closed. It was nuts. Anyway, so now they'll be alternating Star Wars and Avatar every December. So if Avatar is successful, which who knows, the cultural impact I think has been less than anticipated, but we'll see, because James Cameron has been known to pull rabbits out of his hat almost every time. So I will withhold judgment on that. So that means that we have Avatar being delayed a year to December 2021 with a new Star Wars movie coming out 2022 and then every 2 years. So this is a double-edged sword. One, it means that we have a new Star Wars series coming out. We kind of knew that. We're not sure if it's the Rian Johnson series or the Benioff and Weiss series, or if it'll be something else. A lot can change in the next 3 years. The downside potentially is that means that for 3 years there won't be any Star Wars movies. However, they also have Disney Plus. They have the shows coming out. They may be pivoting to that. It's Disney, so they also have Marvel shows coming out, and they're launching Phase 4 eventually. So it's interesting. I think as a fan who wants to see a lot of Star Wars movies, obviously 3 years could be a long time. But I think potentially this could be good for the franchise in terms of avoiding fatigue.
Well, Spectre came out in 2015. Skyfall came out in 2012. It's been 5 years since the last Bond movie, and it'll be 7 years since the last good one by the time Bond 25 comes out. That was an unfair knock at Spectre. I actually really enjoy watching that.
Do you just want to bring up Star Trek just to get it out of the way?
I'm
just
waiting to think about what I can do to get Batman in here also. Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't sound like that long of a wait to me. Certainly,
as you get older, it seems like less and less. Right?
Certainly, as I march ever closer to death.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a bummer. We've been a little spoiled. It's been really, really nice having a Star Wars every year to look forward to. I mean, I do think what it signals to me is they're looking at the box office. They're looking at the general. They're taking the temperature of the Star Wars fans, and they're not sure that it's not been the sort of success that they've seen on the Marvel side of the Disney lot, you know, just in terms of like, I guess like the feeling, there's just been more like annoying press, I think, around it. And I think that like gets people shaken, and I think they want to figure out like how to roll out like the trilogies in the sort of most impactful, you know, best received way. I'm fine with it.
And truth be told, the stakes are a little higher just in terms of storytelling expectation.
I think totally.
I adore the Marvel movies. They've brought me so many hours of joy. They come out 2 to 3 a year. So we judge them differently than something that comes out every 2 years or whatever. And it may be that Disney is like, we have our evergreen franchise. We could put out Marvel movies ad infinitum gauntlet. And keep doing that, and people will keep showing up because they're comic book movies and they treat them like comic books. You know, like it's like, here's a new issue, here's a new issue, here's an annual, that kind of thing. And that's awesome. Star Wars is a little different, where it is every episode is it's a bigger deal thing. You know, not every Marvel movie is Endgame.
100%.
You know what I mean?
I totally agree. I wonder how James Cameron feels about like now having like the heaviest lift of his career essentially being like off-brand Star Wars. It's like the in-betweens.
Well, so what I understand, what I read, and I wish I had a source for this. It may have been Slash Film, but I'm not sure. Is that Avatar by Disney they've greenlit up until Avatar 3, and 4 and 5 I think is kind of a wait and see, because this is obviously a holdover from Fox. So we will have to see like how those fare. If they may become like a big franchise. Right now Avatar isn't a franchise, it's a movie, you know, with a theme park ride, which is cool. And I think, do they have Avatar Land at Disney? Is that like a whole thing?
I couldn't tell you.
I'm not Mike,
I'm not super invested in the Avatar world.
See, I like Avatar fine. I don't like I'm certainly not a hater of Avatar, but I've liked every movie that James Cameron has made. So, and like I said, he's pulled rabbits out of his hat. So Avatar 2 might be awesome. It might be like nothing we've ever seen. It'd be tough to imagine such a quantum leap as Avatar was. You know, just because it's like video games. There's like diminishing returns as things get better and better. But we'll see. You know, we will see. But I do wonder...
Genuine question.
Yeah.
Genuine question. Sorry to derail you, but
no,
honest question. What did you feel when you saw Avatar in 2000? It was 2009, right? 2009? When you saw it...
Yeah, I think it was Christmas 2009. Yeah.
When you saw it, did you feel that it was a huge leap forward?
Yes. Truly, yeah. I did. I got a feeling watching Avatar that I've only gotten watching movies that I feel like are special and, like I've never seen anything like this. Now, I'm not saying that I get that feeling now when I watch it, but I got it when I watched it in 2009. Acknowledging that the writing is clunky, and all of his writing is.
No. Yeah, and I think maybe I think I've never gotten that. I'd be curious to go. I have not watched it in probably 6 or 7 years. I know I watched it once with Chris, when he got like the 3D Blu-ray or something, and bought a bunch of glasses for no reason. Hey, Chris, wherever you are, charge up those glasses.
Here's the thing: is that I think consensus is that Avatar has not had a huge cultural footprint. It certainly didn't have the cultural footprint that something like Titanic did, right? And also, by the time Avatar 2 comes out, that'll be 12 years between sequels. In a time where, like, attention spans are short, and it's been kind of proven that, like, delayed sequels, not that anything kind of has an equivalent to Avatar, but delayed sequels, don't always fare well.
Well,
not everything is Fury Road. You know what I mean?
Well, that's true. This is ironically, I was here trying to talk you out of why Avatar is interesting or good in any way, and I am thinking, like, if there's one thing that I really have kind of always enjoyed from James Cameron, it's his sequels, and it's like his boldness in sequel storytelling. Like he the couple of them that he's done, he's taken the approach of, like, it's got to be a different movie, it's got to feel different, it's got to, like, reinvent itself. Yep. And I don't know, so far I don't have the impression that he's trying to do that with Avatar, but I don't have the impression that he's decidedly not trying to do that. So I get, look, I'm going to see it.
I mean, he's only made one sequel, yes.
Aliens, right? and Terminator 2.
Well, Aliens, I guess he didn't make the first one, right. Aliens is dope as hell, and Terminator 2 is the second best action movie ever made. So it's like, maybe Avatar 2 will be the second best Na'vi movie ever made, Well,
I mean, if it's the second best Na'vi movie ever made.
Yeah, he pulled it off. He did it. Second best Na'vi movie ever made. Sam, I see you.
You should not be. You should not be here. I see you, Jake
Sully.
I did the hand.
Zoe Saldana is amazing in that movie.
She's fantastic. I did the hand.
Sam Worthington is could have just been a lump of laundry.
Well, he passed on hiring Chris Evans, and he passed on hiring Channing Tatum, both of whom were up for the role.
Is that true? Channing Tatum, whatever. He's actually Channing Tatum does some interesting stuff sometimes.
I think both of them
I take it back. Chris, is that true? He passed on casting Chris Evans?
That was the final three. Those were the final three.
Oh my God, he missed out on one of God's angels here on Earth.
To be fair, they may have turned him down, but I did recently learn that those were the final three, and at least in public, he's very vocally said that, like, he's back. He still backs the Sam Worthington play, which is kind of hilarious.
Oh, he loves the Sam Worthington play. I do believe, though, now I'm remembering that Chris Evans, there's B-roll of Chris Evans wearing the like suit, the mocap suit.
Oh, really?
And saying, I couldn't do this all day. That was a long road. It was a long road to a cul-de-sac. Anyway, so, yeah, I think this will be good I think a break might be good for the Star Wars franchise. It builds excitement, and then it'll be a big event, for all of us and for me to have a nervous breakdown for in 2022.
Well, and it gives us...
I'll put it on my calendar.
It gives us some time, and this is, I think, the real secret. I mean, it gives everybody some time to start, building up that extended universe material. all that stuff that the novelizations that we snapped away in 2012, 2013 when Disney bought Star Wars.
The acquisition
became unofficial. Now we get to build it all up again. There's a new Obi-Wan.
There's going to be new
and Qui-Gon novel that's out that an artist I like did the cover for.
Is that the slash fiction that you wrote?
Whoa.
Self-published, yes.
No, that's only on NSFW Reddits. But I saw it on Instagram that an artist I follow did the cover for a new novel that's about my boys. about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. That's like,
and you know
exactly
what?
what I want.
I'll tell you what, Sam. We're closing in on almost 100 episodes of this thing. So that's 3 years for people to catch up on the Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast.
And we'll be here. We'll be here.
Oh, we'll be here.
Podding it up.
What we'll be talking about? Probably the Qui-Gon novel. Maybe doing live reads of our fan fiction. Who knows?
Write in. Tell us what you want us to talk about.
What do you want us to talk about?
We've got the road to...
We're going to be turning into an advice podcast for the next 3 years.
The Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars column.
That's right.
But
ask Annie.
Ask Annie? Well, that's pretty good. I don't know. Anything else to share for the... I feel like we really... Look, here's the bottom line is, in the last week, we've had kind of a moment to reflect on the trilogy that started it all, with another one of the, original actors sadly passing away. It's a great time to go back and revisit, all the movies with Peter Mayhew, but in particular the original trilogy. Go revisit The Force Awakens, see if you can spot where it was him, where it was Jonas. But then also at the end of the day, we got an official announcement of dates for the new slate of the next trilogy, and we've got confirmation that the next 3 Star Wars movies after Episode 9 are going to be a trilogy, and they're going to come out in order, uninterrupted. I'm dying to know which it is.
Will one be directed by Colin Trevorrow? Will another be directed by Josh Trank? We don't know.
I think we know the answer to that. Certainly the latter question.
Well, yeah. I think that about wraps it up. Sam, roll off the social media.
Absolutely. Please, if you're not already, follow us on Twitter at DroidsPod, Instagram at DroidsPod, Facebook, The Droids Podcast. droidspod@gmail.com is where you can write in or send us a little audio voicemail. And rate and review on iTunes or whatever podcast apps you use. And honestly, just tell a friend if you've been listening. If God knows if you made it this far in, not just in episode count, but also through all the minutes of this recording session where we talked about Avatar for half of it. If you've made it this far and you think that you enjoy it and you think you have friends who might, please tell them. Subscribe their phones without them knowing. Then say the Ghost of Star Wars Future did it. Or something.
Go to an Apple store. Subscribe all the phones.
Please do. I mean, I don't know if we can officially endorse that, but I am officially endorsing that as on the pod's behalf, as something you should go out and do. That's going to do it for us. Mike, we miss you. Come home. Chris, we miss you. Come home. Take your time. We miss Mike a lot. And we'll be back next week. This has been The Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast.
What they throw?
Beautiful.